Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty fascinating today, community development. Specifically, there's a project in East Baltimore that caught our eye. And trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, definitely. And we've got some interesting paperwork to unpack here.
We do. We've got these meeting minutes from the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition, HEBCC.
Right. HEBCC.
Then there's this concept paper about using something called Maryland Historic Tax Credits. And to top it off, we're taking a deep dive into the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative. That's BRNI, if you want to be in the know.
Catchy. I like it.
What starts as a story about revitalization, though, kind of unravels into, well, a bit of a head-scratcher. We're talking power dynamics, financial tightropes, and the very real impact on the people who call this neighborhood home.
It's complicated, but that's why we're here.
Exactly.
Mm.
So let's start with the heart of it all, the Eager Street Project.
Big revitalization effort. HEBCAC seems to be the main group pushing it forward.
But here's the thing. They only have 5% ownership. You've got two other players. AE Holdings, LLC. That's David Haas's company, right?
That's right. They've also got a tiny slice of the pie, 5% to be exact.
And then there's Healthy Planet, LLC, owned by Ted Rouse. They're holding a whopping 90% ownership.
90%. Now that's what I call a major stakeholder.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite this ownership breakdown, the meeting minutes show some concerns from the KBSAC board about a lack of transparency, especially early on.
Yeah, it's almost like decisions were made and then, well, HEBCAC was brought in later.
It seems that way, right? And then there are these two names that just kept appearing, Ed Sabatino and Jeff Thompson. They had all this decision-making power, acted as authorized agents, but had zero ownership in the project.
Now that's a head scratcher if I've ever heard one. Lots of influence, but no skin in the game, as they say. Makes you wonder.
It does. And then there's the legal side of things. The operating agreement is very specific about liability and finances, and, well, it's worth a closer look.
It's always in the fine print, isn't it?
Always. So HEBCAC is indemnified. Basically, they're off the hook if the project ends up in legal hot water.
Sounds straightforward enough.
But, and this is a big but, that protection vanishes if there's even a whiff of fraud or illegal activities.
Ah, so it's a safety net, but with some pretty big holes in it.
Exactly. So knowing all that, how does HEBCAC actually benefit financially from this project?
Good question. They get development fees, which is standard practice, and the agreement outlines how they'll divvy up future profits, if there are any.
Right, but, and I think this is important, there's a real possibility HEBCAC might need to cough up more money down the line.
Additional funding. Now, that could be tricky, especially with those homeowner concerns we touched on earlier.
Yeah, those homeowner concerns, it's a whole other layer of this, isn't it? We're talking about 5 homeowners who actually filed a lawsuit against the project.
And HEBCAC, now they're stuck trying to make things right. They promised to cover the costs of repairs.
It's that dilemma, right? You've got the big picture, this whole revitalization project, and then you have these very real, very immediate needs of the people living there.
Trying to balance the books while also, doing right by the community. And it gets tricky because the documents don't really clarify what caused these homeowner issues in the first place.
It's like, was it bad construction? Were there already problems with these buildings before the project even began?
Right, and without knowing who's at fault, it makes it pretty hard to say, okay, you're responsible for footing the bill.
And just to complicate matters even further, the Attorney General gets involved, sends this demand letter, gives ABBSAC a grand total of 10 days to respond. Could you imagine the pressure?
Talk about a time crunch. 10 days to figure out this incredibly complex situation. It's no wonder they were between a rock and a hard place.
So what happened? Did they end up paying?
They did. ABBSAC ultimately wrote checks to the homeowners to cover those repairs. But, and I think this is where it gets interesting, they also acknowledged that they needed a better way to handle things moving forward.
Yeah, a more transparent process.
Exactly. They brought in an independent project manager specifically to oversee any future repairs. But, it does feel a bit like putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem, doesn't it?
It does make you wonder, like, if there had been more community involvement from the beginning, could this have been avoided?
Maybe. Maybe not. These projects are never easy.
That's true. But this brings us to a potential solution that's mentioned quite a bit in the documents, the Maryland Historic Tax Credit.
Ah, yes. The concept paper suggests this program could be a game changer. It could help fund projects like this and, get this, make those renovated homes more affordable for low to moderate income families.
That seems to line up with HEBCAC's mission. but I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand how these tax credits work.
It's kind of like a financial incentive for developers. So basically, instead of the homeowner getting the tax break directly, the developers get it, and that allows them to offer the homes at a lower price.
Okay, so it's a way to make affordable housing more appealing to developers. Makes sense. But the document mentions streamlining this whole process. What does that mean in practice?
Think of it like a pre-approval. Before the developer even breaks ground, they get this guarantee from the state for a certain amount of tax credit. It gives them some financial security, which makes it easier to offer those lower prices.
I see, so less risk for the developer.
Mm.
But the document doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of this streamlined process. Like, what are the steps? How does a developer qualify?
Exactly, and that's often the missing piece, isn't it? The details, the fine print. But the idea itself, using these tax credits to create more affordable housing, that's promising.
It is. But speaking of promising, I think we should shift gears and talk about the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative. We've been calling it BRNI.
Right, BRNI. Now, this is where our deep dive expands a bit. We're not just talking about one street anymore. BRNI has its hands in a lot of projects all over Southeast Baltimore.
And it's not just about, like, building new stuff, right?
Yeah.
They're funding improvements to existing things, too. This Eager Street Vacants to Value project, for example.
Turning those empty buildings into homes for people. Now, that's what I call making a difference.
It's pretty impressive, actually. And they've also invested in the Northeast market, community art projects, even after-school programs.
They're everywhere. It's clear BRNI is a major player in all of this.
They are. But it does beg the question, with their involvement in the Eager Street project, especially their funding, how does that impact their role? Are they just a neutral money source? Or are they more involved than that? That's the big question, isn't it? How much influence does a group like BRNI have? And how does that impact a project like this?
Well, and who benefits in the end? It makes you think about the bigger picture, right?
It does. This whole idea of revitalization progress is great, but not if it comes at the cost of pushing out the people who already call this neighborhood home.
You've got to find a way to balance things out, don't you? New development, new opportunities, but without forgetting the people who've been here all along.
Exactly. Their stories, their struggles, even their hopes for the future, those matter. And they don't always fit into these big plans that developers and even city planners come up with.
It's a tough one. How do you make sure everyone benefits?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What have we learned from all of this?
Well, for starters, I think it's clear that transparency is key. No more decisions made behind closed doors.
People deserve to know what's happening in their own communities, especially when it directly affects them.
Absolutely. And along with that, there needs to be a system of accountability. When problems pop up, which they always do, there needs to be a clear way to address them.
Right, and that goes back to power dynamics. We keep coming back to that. How do we make sure everyone has a voice, not just the people with the most money or influence?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Making sure everyone feels heard. And I think this deep dive has shown just how complex these projects can be. It's more than just bricks and mortar.
It's about people, their lives, their livelihoods, their sense of belonging. It's about creating a community where everyone can thrive, not just survive. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are your takeaways? What questions are you left with?
It makes you think about what's happening in your own backyard, doesn't it?
It really does. Are there similar projects happening where you live? What voices are being heard? Whose aren't? It's about staying informed, engaged, and making sure that community development truly benefits the entire community. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.